Hi, Anisekai here, and today I'll cover the show Beyond the Boundary. While contemplating ending it, second-year high school student Akihito Kanbara notices the freshman Mirai Kuriyama about to jump off of the school roof and instinctively goes to save her. Annoyed by his attempt to stop her, Mirai impales Akihito through the heart with a carmine sword. Sometime later, Akihito and his friend Mitsuki Nase work on preparing an anthology for their literary club when Mirai disturbs them. It is revealed that Mirai had been stalking Akihito all week in an attempt to kill him. However, Mirai's attempts prove to be futile due to Akihito's immortality as a half-yumu. Afterwards, Mitsuki teases Akihito on being stalked by Mirai and advises him to steer clear of the latter. When confronted by Mirai after school once more, Akihito learns that the Kuriyama clan was wiped out because of their powerful ability to create weapons from their own blood, leaving the former as the lone survivor. Afterwards, Mirai chases Akihito into a classroom when they are suddenly interrupted by a yumu crashing through the window, although famous spirit world warrior Shizuku Ninomiya quickly deals with it. Akihito later treats Mirai to dinner and learns that she had been merely using him as battle practice before being left with an unanswered question. Meanwhile, Shizuku kills the previous yumu and extracts a stone at its core. The next day, Mitsuki once again warns Akihito to avoid Mirai, but he instead chooses to talk with the latter after school. While having dinner at the playground, Akihito learns that a yumu had been haunting Mirai's home, in addition to her hate towards her cursed ability, as well as the act of killing. Empathizing with her, Akihito decides to help Mirai kill the yumu and both confront it at her home. Akihito momentarily spaces out as they face the yumu, although Mirai manages to drive it outdoors. Mirai gives chase and engages the yumu into a ferocious battle at the playground, and after a bit of a struggle, strikes near its eye, albeit escaping. Losing the resolve to follow through, Mirai suggests they leave it be, but ends up chasing after it following Akihito's warning of her declining living expenses. Mirai then removes her ring, amplifying her powers further and splashes acidic blood on the yumu. Now immobilized, Mirai destroys its eye, killing it in the process and revealing an ultramarine stone at its core. Akihito then tends to Mirai's wounds and offers to let her join the literary club, which she rejects before passing out. The next day, Akihito and Mirai take the yumu stone to an appraiser, but are instead greeted by the humanoid yumu, Ai Shindo, prompting Mirai to instinctively draw her sword before they explain the many natures of yumu and the appraising process to her. While at school, Akihito tries to gather information on the aggressiveness of the recent yumu attacks from Hirumi Nase, to no avail. Afterwards, Akihito visits the appraiser Ayaka Shindo to get her to reveal the contents of a postcard from his mother Yayoi Kanbara, where she warns him of the coming of a yumu known as the Hollow Shadow, a powerful yumu which lacks a physical body. Ayaka explains that following its last appearance, it effortlessly defeated 5 A-level spirit warriors, and the recent low-level yumu were probably agitated by its proximity. Afterwards, Ayaka appraises Mirai's yumu stone, and she uses the money to treat Akihito to a beef bowl while pleading with him not to further involve himself in her affairs because she had killed someone. The following day, Mirai chases a low-level yumu, and after finding herself unable to kill it, Mitsuki appears and kills it, offering Mirai its stone, which she rejects as charity. Meanwhile, an interrogation officer from the Spirit World Warriors Observation Department, Miroku Fujima, meets with Izumi Nase to discuss the coming of the Hollow Shadow. While at school, Akihito tries once more in vain to get Mirai to visit the literary club, and in obtaining information about the latter from Hirumi. Mitsuki later has Akihito rendezvous with her at the train yard to disclose some sensitive information she obtained from Iori Ichinomiya. Mitsuki reveals that Mirai may go after the Hollow Shadow and of her adoption by the Inami clan who lost their daughter at the hands of Mirai while confronting the yumu itself. Meanwhile, as the Hollow Shadow enters Nagatsuki City, causing the moon to cast an eerie purple glow, Akihito tries to prevent Mirai from going after the yumu. Mirai tells Akihito of her connection to the Inami clan and that she murdered her friend, Yui Inami, out of fear after the Hollow Shadow possessed her. However, despite Akihito's pleas that their lives aren't different, Mirai bars him from going with her. Afterwards, Spirit World warriors in the area are tasked with setting up barriers to guide the Hollow Shadow out of the city. As the yumu in the area become increasingly influenced with malice by the Hollow Shadow, Mirai makes her way to the city limits and prepares to confront it. However, Sakura Inami attacks her with killing intent just as they both become engulfed and get thrown into a random part of the city by the Hollow Shadow. Finally, Akihito suddenly stops Sakura's attack and states that Mirai still didn't understand his words. Akihito and Mirai flee from Sakura's onslaught, down the illusionary labyrinth created by the hollow shadow. Arriving at a twisted replication of the train yard, Mirai becomes ensnared by the shadow as it mimics Yui's likeness. However, Akihito snaps Mirai back to reality before the shadow kills her. Revealing its main body, the shadow attacks Mirai, who retaliates by injecting its body with a massive amount of corrosive blood which destroys it. Finding themselves back on the mountaintop, Mirai questions her self-image to Akihito. As Akihito sincerely replies, the weakened shadow suddenly possesses his body, causing him to plead with a horrified Mirai to inject him with her blood. This forces the shadow out of Akihito, and Mirai finally destroys it. Afterwards, Hirumi, Ayaka, and Shizuku show up and bar Mirai from going to Akihito's aid, instead locking him in a cage, with Ayaka explaining of Akihito's Yumu half's awakening due to his human half's weakened state. Mirai then horrifically watches as Akihito undergoes a sudden transformation and goes berserk. Despite the trio's attempts to keep Akihito contained, they are soon overwhelmed by his immense destructive power, with his orange fireballs completely devastating the surrounding landscape. Seeing herself in Akihito, Mirai breaks into tears and locks him in a bear hug until his rampaging Yumu half calms down. In the aftermath, as Akihito reawakens and despises the devastation he caused, Mirai breaks into tears following his apology. Meanwhile, after observing the struggle, Miroku decides to report back to the society. Sometime later, Mirai and Akihito go out to dinner, with the latter posing the same question she did to him earlier, and Mirai replies with a normal response just as he did for her. Mirai finally gives in and joins the literary club due to Akihito's constant pestering. Afterwards, Mirai, Akihito, Mitsuki, and Hirumi visit the Nase mansion where they run into a departing Miroku. Izumi then temporarily confiscates Mirai's Spirit World Warrior license for a month on account of disobeying her orders and going after the Hollow Shadow. Mitsuki then agrees to take Mirai to her part-time job in the hopes that her boss would hire her so she may have income for the next month. While they discuss this at a pancake house, Mitsuki and Mirai also discuss the latter's change of heart to socialization and Akihito's relationship with the Nase clan. Just then, they notice a passerby possessed by a Yumu and instantly go after it. Mirai eventually battles and kills the Yumu just as Shizuku shows up and treats them to barbecue as thanks. As Mirai notices a poster of the annual Nagatsuki City Lantern Festival, Mitsuki recalls how she was barred from ever attending the festival due to her duties as a Spirit World Warrior. Afterwards, Mitsuki and Mirai visit Ayaka's shop for the former's part-time job, and Ayaka hires Mirai in addition to forcing her into a photo shoot for extra money. Afterwards, they mention Akihito's depression following his Yumu transformation. While they watch the shop, Mirai tries to ask Mitsuki why she refuses to go to the festival to no avail, leaving her with the answer that Spirit World Warriors are alone. However, Mitsuki eventually changes her mind when she recalls how she had set up chartreuse lanterns in her room as a child. Finally, Mirai and Mitsuki run into a surprised Akihito and Hirumi at the festival, and upon Akihito's confusion at their arrival, Mirai knowingly implies that on the night of the festival, none of them have to be alone. Mirai starts bringing bonsai trees to the literary club meetings, and Akihito deduces her gardening hobby to be the true culprit behind her constant financial problems. Having gotten her license back, Mirai gets information from Ayaka about a valuable fruit-type Yumu that lurks on their school roof, and Mirai immediately runs off without waiting for Ayaka to explain its characteristics. That evening, Ai explains that the Yumu gets easily distracted by human girls, and thus a two-person team would be needed to defeat it. Hence, Akihito and Mirai pressure Mitsuki into helping. The following day, Mirai showcases some seductive poses in front of the Yumu while Mitsuki approaches from behind. However, that plan quickly fails, and the Yumu marks Mitsuki in a much more horrendous pink liquid. As the group contemplates giving up, Hirumi explains that the last time the Yumu was killed, a special song was used to distract it. However, that plan also fails when Mirai turns out to be a terrible singer. As the entire group showers again that day, everyone decides to go after the Yumu again, and hence spend the next week practicing the words and dance choreography for the song. Akihito, Mirai, Mitsuki, Hirumi, and Ai then show off the results of their training and perform the song perfectly in front of the Yumu and lowering its guard. When the performance ends, however, the group horrifically realize their failure of assigning someone to kill the Yumu, at which point it explodes and covers the entire roof in a torrent of yellow liquid. Sakura recalls Yui's warning of the Hollow Shadow's power while hunting an amphibious Yumu. The next day, Shizuku interrupts the literary club's usual theatrics to inform them of Sakura's impending transfer to their high school. However, Mirai decides not to intervene in the matter. That evening, Akihito goes to Sakura's aid when she passes out from fighting a flying Yumu and takes her home to tend to her wounds. Here, Sakura explains that her spear grows stronger by devouring Yumu stones, and that a mysterious man gave it to her, which she may keep for herself, given that she kills Mirai. At that instant, Mirai unexpectedly drops by to return Akihito's phone, forcing the latter to reveal Sakura, when Mirai spirals out of control upon noticing the second pair of shoes at his doorstep. The next day, Sakura has a successful transfer, despite Akihito's caution. That afternoon, Mirai and Sakura meet at a market alley to settle their score and begin their inevitable battle. Drawing Sakura into the sewers, Mirai explains her realization of revenge being the wrong path and her intention to live for the sake of the Yanami sisters. This causes Sakura to lose her fighting resolve, at which point the spear attempts to devour her before Mirai stops it. In the aftermath, Sakura admits having lost sight of herself at the chime of Yui's bell necklace, clouding her feelings for Mirai, which she accepts, and both reconcile. With the spear now having devoured enough Yumu, Miroku collects it with the intention of retrieving the Hollow Shadow's stone. Finally, Izumi and Mitsuki witness the beginning of a phenomenon called the Calm as it spreads through Nagatsuki City, foreshadowing something known as Beyond the Boundary. Akihito receives a postcard from Yayoi, warning them of the coming of the Calm as the city starts feeling its effects. Ai and Ayaka explain that during the Calm, all Yumu become severely weakened, and warns them that Akihito could potentially lose his immortality during the period. As the group later heads home, Miroku intercepts Mitsuki and explains that the mirrored phenomenon she witnessed was actually a fraction of a Yumu, known as the one beyond the boundary. Miroku further explains that he was sent to investigate the Nase family's plans for this Yumu by the society, and learned that Izumi had saved Mirai from being killed by the Yanami clan following Yui's death. Overlooking the golden sunset by the shoreline, Hirumi then intervenes and attacks Miroku, after which he escapes. Elsewhere, Akihito awakens on the train home, following a horrible flashback before Izumi puts him to sleep once more. Afterwards, Ayaka decides to watch over Akihito at her shop as he starts feeling the Calm's effects. Afterwards, the Calm finally begins at midnight, and the spirit world warriors of the city, including Shizuku and Izumi, start slaughtering any and all Yumu in sight. Meanwhile, as Hirumi and Mitsuki try to understand the conflict between their clan and the society, they learn of Akihito's state and notice a giant Yumu, while Sakura manages to convince Mirai to return to Akihito's side. At the same time, Ayaka intercepts Miroku outside her shop following his intention to capture Akihito for the society and attacks him in her Yumu form. However, before Ayaka becomes overpowered, Izumi intervenes and stops Miroku's attack. Finally, as Mirai rushes back to the shop, Akihito's Yumu half awakens. Upon arriving at the Shindo shop, Mirai horrifically discovers Akihito in his Yumu form. Meanwhile, as Hirumi and Mitsuki have their hands full with the giant Yumu, Izumi faces off against Miroku, who escapes when a nearby fireball distracts Izumi. Afterwards, Izumi returns to the shop and attacks Akihito in front of Mirai before he too manages to escape. At the same time, Hirumi and Mitsuki manage to defeat the large shadow and later rendezvous at Akihito's apartment with Izumi and Mirai. Here, Mirai relays Ayaka's explanation that the Calm had weakened Akihito's human half more than his Yumu half, causing the latter to surface. As they track Akihito through the woods, Izumi suggests that Mirai can now kill Akihito with his immortality nullified by the Calm, since if it ends, his Yumu half would likely gain dominance over his body and become unstoppable. The following day, as Mitsuki and Hirumi ponder on Izumi's ulterior motive, the latter confronts her using Miroku's rationale of manipulating Mirai, and that she deliberately weakened Akihito's human half with her freezing barrier, prompting his Yumu emergence. However, Izumi instead warns him about the society. Dissatisfied, Hirumi tries to get Mirai to change her mind from killing Akihito, and later enters the Nase family archives, where he discovers the shocking revelation of Akihito's Yumu half being the one beyond the boundary. Just then, as Miroku manages to steal the Hollow Shadow stone from the Nase vault, Mirai tracks Akihito's Yumu form to a deserted part of the forest under the silver rain clouds, and engages him in a furious battle, eventually injuring him fatally. Finally, with her heart breaking, Mirai rushes Akihito to deliver the final blow. A flashback shows Izumi summoning Mirai to Nagatsuki City. In the present, Akihito awakens in his apartment and learns that Mirai had been taking care of him following his Yumu transformation. The two later arrive at the literary club, where Mirai reveals that she exists via a portion of her blood within Akihito, and they are simply a part of his dream, since he remained unconscious following their last encounter. She goes on to explain that she was sent to Nagatsuki City with the sole purpose of killing the Beyond the Boundary Yumu, but couldn't bring herself to harm Akihito. Instead, she used her blood during the calm to draw the Yumu out of Akihito and into herself before vanishing. Mirai then kisses Akihito before the dream ends, with the latter awakening in a state of shock. 6 months earlier, Izumi summons Mirai to Nagatsuki City and brings her before the Nase family head, where they enlist her aid in destroying the Beyond the Boundary Yumu within Akihito Kanbara, before the Spirit World Warrior Society gets to it first. Mirai later transfers to Nagatsuki High and fails to kill Akihito on numerous occasions, instead getting to know him better. However, Izumi warns her to emotionally distance herself from Akihito. Failing to do so, Mirai comes to understand Akihito's pain during the Hollow Shadow incident, and later makes it known to Izumi during the Lantern Festival of her choice to not kill Akihito. Izumi then uses her freezing barrier to help the Yumu surface from Akihito's body during the calm, and manipulates Mirai into thinking that she can save him by sacrificing herself to the Yumu, to which Mirai agrees. Elsewhere, in the snowy white mirror world, Mirai makes her way towards the Beyond the Boundaries core. Following his 3-month coma, Akihito learns from Hirumi and Mitsuki that his separation from the Beyond the Boundary apparently cost Mirai her life and robbed him of his immortality. Akihito later demands to speak with Izumi out of frustration, although Hirumi tries explaining its futility. As if on cue though, Izumi shows up and explains the nature of the Beyond the Boundary and her use of Mirai's cursed blood to defeat it. However, when Mirai refused to kill Akihito, she was forced to reveal a way that would save him, to which Mirai unhesitatingly accepted. That evening, Akihito opens his last email from Mirai where she explains that meeting him allowed her to gain self-acceptance. Meanwhile, Miroku deduces that the weakened Beyond the Boundary simply retreated into another dimension to battle Mirai while simultaneously absorbing the supernatural energy from the real world. Miroku then uses the spear to inject a massive amount of energy into the Beyond the Boundary and exposes the black sphere hovering above the city, which proceeds to attract and absorb all of the city's Yumu. Amidst the chaos, Akihito and the gang are also summoned to the literary club, where Yayoi informs them of Mirai's survival and battle against the Beyond the Boundary. She then gives Akihito the shard of the Beyond the Boundary stone, allowing him to regain a portion of his powers, while explaining that it emerged when he was possessed by the Hollow Shadow. Finally, despite Izumi's warning, Akihito manages to pass into the Black Sphere by merging with Mirai's puppet version of himself, and catches Mirai during her destructive battle with the Beyond the Boundary. As Mirai and Akihito reunite, Izumi demands that Yayoi tell her exactly what a half-Yumu is. However, Yayoi makes a quick escape after warning them of the society's movement. At the same time, Akihito uses his Yumu powers to defend himself from the Beyond the Boundary's attacks before he and Mirai make their way to its core. Elsewhere, Shizuku, Sakura, Hirumi, Mitsuki, and Izumi confront Miroku. However, he seals himself and Izumi inside a barrier to prevent outside interference. Back in the mirror world, Mirai and Akihito just narrowly reach the Beyond the Boundary's core, where Mirai manages to impale it with her sword. Meanwhile, Hirumi enters Miroku's barrier and learns that both Miroku and Izumi harbor Yumu within their bodies, in addition that Izumi isn't the person she claims to be. Izumi then impales Miroku with her spear, who seemingly self-destructs. Meanwhile, Akihito and Mirai face and overcome their dark memories inside the Beyond the Boundary's core, and find themselves in a ferocious battle against an army of Yumu. Finally, as the Beyond the Boundary emerges, Akihito beats it into submission and reabsorbs it back into his body. With the Beyond the Boundary gone, the mirror world and Mirai begin disappearing, and Mirai and Akihito share a tender moment before she disappears. Sometime later, the world returns to normal, with the Beyond the Boundary incident being covered up and Hirumi taking over the Nase clan. As Akihito laments on a life without Mirai, he suddenly runs toward the school roof when her ring disappears and reunites with her. After declaring his feelings for her in his own way, Akihito returns Mirai's red-rimmed glasses. That was all. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video.